is a 2022 Hyundai Kona N, and it's rather odd, actually. That's because this is a subcompact crossover high-performance model, which is something that nobody else really offers. And today, I'm going to review the Kona N and show you around this rather unusual vehicle. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my enthusiast car auction website for cool cars from the modern era, now with free listings. You can list your car and auction it on Cars and Bids for free and pay no listing fee or commission for the seller. And we've had some great sales recently, including this Cadillac CT5V Blackwing, which sold for $116,500. This wonderful Porsche Cayman sold for $55,000, and this great C8 Corvette sold for just under $100,000. We've done great with C8s on Cars and Bids. So if you're looking to buy or sell an enthusiast car from the modern era, Cars and Bids is the place to do it, with daily auctions and great selection at carsandbids.com. So let's talk Hyundai Kona N. Like I said, this is a subcompact crossover based on the standard Hyundai Kona, which competes with mainstream models like the Honda HR-V, the Mazda CX-30, the Jeep Renegade, and the Volkswagen Taos. But there's nothing mainstream about the Kona N. That's because it's a high-performance model with 286 horsepower, more than any rival offers by far. You've heard of a hot hatchback. Well, this is a hot subcompact crossover. It's very weird, and today I'm going to review it. First, I'll take you on a thorough tour of the Kona N and show you all of its quirks and features. Then I'll get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'll give it a DOUGSCORE score. All right, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the Kona N with a little overview of what this is, because it's weird. Like I said before, this is a high-performance subcompact crossover, which is very strange. Nobody makes anything like this. It would be like if Honda created a Type R version of its HR-V crossover, or if Jeep made an SRT model of the Renegade. Frankly, those sound like April Fool's jokes an automaker might release, but that's pretty much exactly what Hyundai has done here with the Kona N. And it's particularly surprising because up until this point, high-performance SUVs have mainly been the realm of expensive large vehicles. Mercedes AMG, BMW M, occasionally more affordable stuff like the Jeep Grand Cherokee SRT or the Ford Explorer Sport, but nothing like this, which is relatively affordable with a starting price of around $35,000 for a high-performance SUV. Then again, it could certainly be argued whether the term SUV or even crossover actually applies to the Kona. This is very small, pretty low to the ground, kind of feels more hatchbacky. In fact, it only has 6.7 inches of ground clearance, which is only about an inch more than a Toyota Camry. And crazy thing about the Kona N, the high-performance version only offers front-wheel drive. You can get a regular Kona with front or all-wheel drive, but go here for the performance model and you're stuck with front-wheel drive only, which doesn't really feel very crossover-y to me. But one thing you can't argue about the Kona N is its performance, because this has some pretty impressive numbers. For one thing, you open up the hood, take a look at the engine cover, and you see 8 lines arranged in a V, because this has a V8. No, I'm just kidding. I have no idea why they've done that on the engine cover. This is, of course, a turbocharged 4-cylinder. It's the same Turbo 4 that you find in the Hyundai Veloster N, and it makes 276 horsepower in most situations, or you can temporarily press a boost button inside the car and go to 286 horsepower for brief bursts. I will show you that in a few minutes. But that's a pretty strong figure. 286 horsepower, almost 290 pound-feet of torque in a car that's really not all that big, and the result is 0 to 60 in the low 5-second range, which is a crazy figure for a subcompact crossover. And it's important to point out that even though you don't get all-wheel drive in the Kona N, you do get an electronic limited slip differential in front that can transfer all the power between the front wheels to one or the other depending on slippage, which does help counteract some of the negatives of having front-wheel drive instead of available all-wheel drive. But beyond the extra power and the limited slip diff, the Kona N also gets a lot of other performance car upgrades over a standard Kona, and I'm going to start on the outside, where probably the most noticeable upgrade is no more plastic cladding. Most Kona models have this kind of excessive unpainted plastic cladding around the wheels in the front and rear, kind of all over the sides of the car. Well, the Kona N doesn't have any of that. Instead, all of these panels are body color in the Kona N, which kind of streamlines the look and gives the N more of a performance sporty vibe and kind of a more expensive feel. Also notable up front is you got a more aggressive grille. In fact, the entire front fascia is just more aggressive in the N, including larger openings for more air to pass through, although some of those openings are fake, as you can see. They don't actually do anything, they're just there for style. But there is more front end opened up for more air to come into this engine, which is important because it makes more power. On the subject of fake aggressive styling upgrades though, one disappointment is these nostrils are fake. Directly above the grille, you have these three performance-y nostrils, but they're just plastic pieces. Air doesn't actually pass through them. They're only there to look cool. Now, speaking of looking cool, another upgrade on the outside of the Kona N is a little red trim line that goes around basically the entire lower part of the vehicle. So you see it in front here, this little red stripe around the front end at the very base of the bumper, and you can also see it going down the sides. Once again, you have this red stripe going across the entire side, the rocker panel, which gives it kind of a sporty vibe. You also have the N logo imprinted here on the rocker panel, which again gives it sort of a sporty body kit type vibe and adds to the performance-y character of this car. But anyway, probably the place where this lower red trim line is most noticeable is around back. You can see it's back here and it actually comes up in back a little bit higher than the rest of the car to go around the other two big performance upgrades in back, and that would be this diffuser. Not sure how functional it is, but it certainly looks cool. And you also have dual exhaust back here, which you don't have in the standard Kona, and they sound pretty good. There's various levels of exhaust you can configure while you're driving the Kona. Here is the quietest exhaust level. Okay, nothing too special there, but here is the loudest Kona N exhaust level. Take a listen. But although the exhaust is pretty impressive for a car like this, my favorite detail in the back is not exhaust related, it's higher up. You have a spoiler back here, a rear wing, which is pretty aggressive for a vehicle like this, but it also contains the third brake light, which is this little triangle, which just looks kind of cool. A lot of performance cars have something similar to this as like a rear fog light. Here, they've incorporated that look and made it the third brake light in the Kona N, and I love it. It's a little piece of cool performance car attention to detail that's kind of neat. Also worth mentioning, one other Kona N upgrade on the outside is wheels and tires. These come standard with 19-inch wheels, pretty big for a little crossover, and they come standard with Pirelli P0 summer tires, which is probably tire overkill for a vehicle like this, but that's what you get, a real performance car summer tire for the Kona N. But anyway, next we move inside the Kona N, and the moment you climb inside, you notice quite a few changes over a standard Kona. The most obvious of which is probably badging in this interior. You got N badges pretty much everywhere. The door sill, you have this N badge as you can see. The seat back, you have an N badge pointing right at your back. The base of the steering wheel, you got an N badge there, and the top of the gear lever has an N badge also. You also have an N badge on the floor mats, although this is less of a badge and more of like an actual emblem that you might see stuck on the rear of a car. It's kind of an excessive badge for a floor mat. Usually you just have stitching, but here you have N. And the other noticeable cosmetic upgrade in this interior is stitching, specifically blue stitching, and specifically performance blue stitching, which is Hyundai's N special color. You can see it in a lot of places. On the seats, you have this blue stitching. You also have it on the parking brake handle right here. You have it at the base of the gear shift lever, and you also have it around the steering wheel, all of this performance blue stitching to commemorate the N-ness. But this interior has more upgrades than just some simple cosmetic stuff to make it seem sportier. For one thing, you get sport seats, and these are actually pretty huggy, well bolstered. I wouldn't call them racing seats, but they're certainly sportier than what you get in a standard Kona. And another substantive upgrade in this interior is the drive mode button right here, rather large, sticks way out of the center console, kind of strange, and you twist it to go between drive modes. You have snow, eco, comfort, and then also sport, and you adjust your drive mode through there. But more changes in this interior still. Probably the most notable and important are on the steering wheel, where you can see two different buttons marked N. One has N in blue with a black stripe, and the other has N in black with a blue stripe. So what exactly is going on there? The button over on the left, that also changes your drive modes. You press that and you can cycle through your various different drive modes. Has basically the same function as that drive mode dial in the center, which I just showed you. The button on the right, however, puts you in N mode, which is like a special Sport Plus mode that goes beyond just the standard Sport mode. When you press that, it especially focuses the accelerator, the steering, the suspension for the sportiest driving possible, and it puts the stability control in like a special sport mode, which I guess dials it back a little bit so it won't intervene quite as quickly when you're going around the racetrack in your Kona N. Which nobody will, but you have that opportunity. Now, pressing this button and going into N mode also changes the gauge cluster. You can see it focuses it more, puts the tachometer right in the center with large number displays showing various gauge readouts on either side, which again is important for performance driving, so you don't have to look down, read circle gauges. All those big numbers are looking right at you for ease of use on the racetrack. Now, one other important button you have on the steering wheel is this red circle, which is marked NGS. That is your boost button. And if you're driving along in the right circumstances, like you're in N mode, you can press the NGS button and it will temporarily boost you by 10 horsepower for 20 seconds. So if you need like a quick pass, that's what you press. So why is it called NGS? Well, it stands for N Grin Shift. So N, like the Kona N, and then grin, like a smile, shift. Not sure why they don't just call it boost, but they don't. N grin shift, and that's your button. Now, one other interesting upgrade for the Kona N comes in the infotainment system, where you have a whole N tab that you can go into and explore some interesting infotainment performance features. Like, for example, you have a lap timer in here for all of your racetrack lap timing you do in your subcompact performance SUV. In fact, this N section even has preloaded racetracks. In case you happen to find yourself on one of these racetracks in your Kona N, it has them set up and mapped, and you can time your laps, which is crazy in a vehicle like this, but it's available. They're really selling the N thing. Now, while these preloaded racetracks might not be tremendously useful, in this N tab, you do have an enormous amount of configurability. You can see it here, and you can configure all sorts of different modes for the vehicle, the exhaust sound, the steering, suspension, etc., all in here, and you can create kind of a custom drive mode and a lot of different configurability options, which is cool to see. That is a useful feature of the N tab. Also useful in here is a launch control. The Kona N comes standard with launch control, and you activate it in this infotainment N tab right here. One other cool item you can access in here is this display, which shows like the tachometer and this cool horizontal bar, and it also shows what gear you're in, looking like a drag strip stoplight. They call it a Christmas tree, and it kind of looks like that, and it's sort of neat to see, except that the Kona N is only offered with an automatic transmission, so it's not really all that useful. It's more just kind of a cool gimmick. But indeed, that is the case. Only an 8-speed dual clutch automatic in this car. Dual clutch is a nice quick shifting transmission, but manual fans will be disappointed. You can't get 3 pedals in the Kona N like you can in the Elantra N and the Veloster N. But anyway, next up, moving on to the rest of the interior, aside from the sporty upgrades, and truthfully, there's not really all that much to talk about in here. In fact, this interior pretty much looks like what you'd expect from a subcompact crossover, which is to say, the materials aren't really all that great. You get a lot of kind of cheap looking plastic in here, nothing too nice or luxurious or excessive, which is kind of what you'd expect in a little crossover like this, but just pointing it out in case you're not aware, it's not on par with some luxury performance vehicle. You have, for example, single zone climate control in here, no dual zone for driver and passenger, just one temperature temperature for the entire car. You do have a wireless charging pad, which is a nice touch. Don't always see that at this price point, but it's located here, and obviously it'll charge your device. And obviously right above that, you can see several different power ports, which is nice and convenient. Also worth noting, another luxury touch in this car, but a rather weird one, you have auto steering. This button here activates it, and then you can sit on the freeway and the car will pretty much do the steering for you. It'll go around curves on the highway, it'll keep you in your lane, it'll basically do it all. But the weird part is this doesn't have adaptive cruise control, so it won't speed up or slow down based on the distance to the car in front of you. This is the very first car I've ever been in that had auto steering, but not adaptive cruise. So you have to regulate your own speed, but the car will steer. Definitely a rather odd subject. But on the topic of technology in this car, worth pointing out 2 screens in here, which is nice. You have a gauge cluster screen, which is relatively good, high resolution, full color. I wish it was more configurable, and I wish it showed more things. You can't get it to show you the music you're listening to or any form of map, which is kind of disappointing. What's the point of having a gauge cluster there if you can't see at least one of those important items? Now, you of course can see all of that stuff on your center infotainment screen, which is pretty good. This is very responsive, very intuitive, easy to use. It's a good infotainment system, nice graphics. I like it and I like using it, and it has some nice advantages. Like, for example, you can have 2 things displayed at once. Here's your radio and your weather, for example, which is nice, or you can have a map and your weather, which is also nice to see. And frankly, it's just a responsive, easy, relatively simple system. But anyway, next we move on to the back seat of the Kona N. And the first thing you notice back here is it's pretty tight, which doesn't really surprise me. Subcompact crossover, it's gonna be small in back, but indeed, this one is. Headroom is okay, not really a problem there. The issue is legroom, knee room, pushing right up against the front seat. I think any sort of taller adult is going to feel pretty squeezed in the back of the Kona N. Other than that, nothing really interesting to report back here. You do have one USB port. You can see it here, kind of stuck into the back of the front center console. One port, not really ideal for charging rear passenger devices, but I suppose it's better than nothing having one port back here. But anyway, next we move on to the cargo area in the Kona N, which is actually a little bit bigger than I was expecting given this car's small size. It's got a decent sized cargo area for stuff, and there's a little more space. If you lift up the cargo area floor, you can see a few little panels like trays below the floor where you can stick kind of smaller items if you don't want them rolling around in the back. One other interesting quirk of this car from the back is the positioning of the rear lights, which is rather unusual. This is true of all Kona models, and it's strange. You have 2 different light assemblies in back. The bottom one has the turn signals and the reverse light. The upper one has the tail lights and the brake lights, and they're separate, which is rather weird. And it's the same situation in front. You have one light assembly on the top, which has like your running light and your turn signal, and then another fully separate light assembly below that for your actual headlights and high beams. Kind of strange how they do it, but that is indeed how they do it in the rather quirky Kona. And so those are the quirks and features of the new 2022 Hyundai Kona N. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the Kona N. Here we go. Whoa, God. That is both excitement and laughter at the acceleration and sheer terror at the torque steer, which is significant, especially if you go over any sort of road imperfection. It sends the car sends the steering in a certain direction, and it's difficult to recover. Okay, first things first, this powertrain, love it. Loved it in the Veloster N, loved it in the Elantra N. I think it's great powertrain, a lot of power, very potent, very eager at pretty much any speed. I think it's an excellent powertrain. I don't think it's the perfect powertrain. I think that it feels a little strained sometimes under crazy hard acceleration if you're really pushing it. I feel like that Ford 2.3 turbo 4-cylinder, like the one in the Focus ST, was just a little bit more eager for like mid-range punch. But it's a good powertrain. It's got good torque and power, and that's kind of my only complaint about the powertrain. The drivetrain, however, is a little disappointing. Front-wheel drive only for this, even though the regular Kona is offered with all-wheel drive. And the point of getting a crossover instead of a hatchback like the Veloster or a sedan like the Elantra is you get raised ground clearance, all-wheel drive, better capabilities. The reason they don't do that here, I suspect, is that this powertrain, drivetrain, transmission transmission is only equipped for front-wheel drive, like it is in the Veloster and the Elantra, but it's just kind of a shame in this car because I don't see a huge amount of utility in going for the utility model given the lack of all-wheel drive. It's just kind of disappointing. Now, with that said, it's not like you're making any real major sacrifices to get the Kona over the Veloster N. In fact, one could make an argument that even in spite of the lack of all-wheel drive, this still is considerably more utility. It does have raised ground clearance, and because the Veloster N only has the one door on one side, this with two full-size back doors and a larger rear seat area and a larger cargo area, this is really the practical hot hatch of the bunch. And Hyundai pitches it as a crossover because that's what people buy. But if you really look at the dimensions, there's a lot of hot hatch to this vehicle, even though that's what they're calling it. I'm driving past a Scion XB and a BMW X1, and this is below all that. It really does feel like a hatchback. So maybe think of this like a hot hatch, and then maybe people will be more into it. Speaking of popularity, let's talk about that for a second. This car, I don't think, is going to sell at all. And I think in 15 years, we're going to look back on this and be like, remember when they made a Kona N? And someone else will say, no, they never did an N version of that. And no, I think they did. And that's the kind of thing you'll look up because I think it's going to turn out to be really obscure. I really think that there's no crossover between subcompact crossover shoppers and car enthusiasts. I think that Venn diagram is very, very small. And I think most of the car enthusiasts who are interested in a car like this are probably going to pick up a Veloster N. And if they want more practicality, they're going to shy away from a vehicle labeled as a crossover, and they're going to instead choose a GTI or something of that variety. But this is there if they want. My guess is that this car was not that expensive for Hyundai to create. They had the powertrain, it fit right in. They were able to just kind of paint the body panels on the outside and call it an N model, and there they have a new vehicle that maybe some people will want. But I think this is a weird car, and in that sense, I think it's kind of cool, like a subcompact high-performance crossover, an HRV Type R. Now, in terms of the driving experience, aside from the acceleration, and I gotta really stress that torque steer is a thing in this vehicle. I was reading some reviews, they sort of mention it. It's there, especially if you accelerate hard from a stop. If you're on the freeway like I am now, and you drop a couple gears and floor it, there's no torque steer, it's not really a problem. But when you're going from 0, 10, 20, that kind of thing, and stepping on it, you will get torque steer. Steering and handling is actually pretty decent. Handling is okay. It is certainly not on the level of Veloster N, GTI, that kind of thing. Just by virtue of being raised up, I don't want to be like, oh, it's so tall that it body rolls. It's not that tall, but it's no GTI. It's not like that level of planted and stable. However, the steering feel is pretty good. It's definitely been sharpened up compared to a standard Kona. It feels more on the level of Veloster N and Elantra N than a Hyundai Kona. It's tighter, it's more solid, it's heavier, and all those things contribute to kind of a nice feel when you're even just sort of going around a highway sweeping corner like I am. I took it on some back roads earlier, and I really was kind of surprised at the steering feel of the car. Compared to a regular crossover, it's pretty good and it feels nice and sporty. So my general opinion about this car is it's nice. It offers more practicality than a Veloster N, but you trade some dynamics for that practicality, and it's a little disappointing that there's no all-wheel drive. And most importantly, I don't think anybody's going to buy this. But it's cool and it's interesting, and it's certainly interesting to check out a car with effectively no real rivals in the subcompact high-performance crossover realm. And so that's the 2022 Hyundai Kona N. This is a rather unusual vehicle, pretty weird actually, and I'm not exactly sure how many people are going to buy it. I'm not sure how much overlap there is between car enthusiasts and subcompact crossover shoppers. But if you're looking for a hot hatchback that's a little bit more crossover-y, now you have the Kona N. And now I'm going to give it a DWGSCORE. And the DWGSCORE is here, 54 out of 100, which places the Kona N here against some similar vehicles, although really nothing is that similar to this. The Mazda CX-30 Turbo is probably closest, but the Kona N is way more performance-oriented, and the Kona N beats out all other crossovers on this list in weekend categories, including the Mini Countryman JCW and Kia Soul Turbo. Where the Kona N doesn't win, however, is against the hot hatchbacks. The Kona N is fun and exciting, but not quite on the level of a Veloster N or a Ford Focus ST. Still, if you want near hot hatchback fun and some added practicality and a higher seating position, the Kona N works, and frankly, it kind of lives in a class of its own.